This is my true story. I was a father to 7 sons. I worked, I sacrificed, I gave them everything they ever needed. But one night, the very children I raised turned into my worst nightmare. They dragged me outside in the snow, locked the door, and laughed as I froze in the dark. My heart broke that night, but I didn't die in the cold. I rose from it, and what I did next destroyed all of them. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and please subscribe so more people hear my story. I was not born into wealth. My hands were roughened by years of labor, my back bent from carrying loads heavier than I ever wanted my children to know. Every coin I earned, every dollar I saved, went toward the future of my 7 sons. I told myself again and again, they will never suffer what I have suffered. They will never walk barefoot through mud. They will never go to bed hungry like I once did. For decades, I worked like a mule. I worked in storms. I worked in sickness. I worked when my body begged me to stop. My reward was not comfort, but the sight of my sons in warm clothes, in good schools, in safe homes. I paid for their meals, their books, their celebrations. I even went without winter coats so that each of them had one. I gave up meals so that they could eat their fill. I paid off their debts when they were reckless. I cleared their mistakes when they fell short, and I gave them houses so they would never know the pain of rent. I spent my youth, my strength, and my peace building the foundation of their lives. Every father's dream is to see his children rise higher than himself, and I believed my sons would carry my name with pride. I financed their weddings. I helped them settle into lives of comfort, and I thought the bond of blood would keep us together forever. When my bones ached and my breath grew short with age, I thought I had earned gentleness. I thought my sacrifices would come back to me in the form of respect and care. I was wrong. The 7 sons I raised in warmth and security forgot every sleepless night, every calloused hand, every sacrifice. They looked at me not as the man who had given them everything, but as a burden standing in the way of their pride and laughter. It did not happen all at once. Cruelty is a slow poison, and I drank it drop by drop from the mouths of my 7 sons. At first, it was small things. One of them rolling his eyes when I asked for help lifting a chair, another sighing when I took too long to climb the stairs. Their tone shifted from respect to irritation, their words no longer soft but sharp, like broken glass. One called me old trash when my hands trembled pouring tea. Another muttered, "Just extra weight," when I asked to ride with them into town. Laughter followed these words, not in joy, but in mockery, the kind of laughter that strips dignity from the soul. Every dinner table became a trial where I sat in silence, listening to my sons joke about my weakness as if I could not hear them. They told me I was too slow, too fragile, a shadow taking up space. Sometimes they did not even bother lowering their voices. They wanted me to hear. They wanted me to feel small. I had once sacrificed my food so they could eat, but now they sneered when I asked for an extra slice of bread. My heart sank each time, but I swallowed my pain in silence. I told myself, they are young, they are foolish. They will remember love, but the remembering never came. Instead, the cruelty grew louder, bolder, as if kindness was something they had buried long ago. When relatives visited, my sons would parade me like a broken relic, making jokes about how the old man still thinks he matters. I sat there, my face burning, my chest heavy, but I said nothing. I had given them everything, every drop of strength I had, yet they treated me like a ghost in the home I built. Their words were not just insults, they were daggers meant to pierce the last pride left in me. The night of betrayal came when the snow was thick on the ground, when the cold cut through bone like knives. I remember the sky, heavy, gray, the kind of sky that promised no mercy. I sat near the fire, my frail hands stretched toward the faint warmth, thinking maybe, just maybe, the storm outside would remind my sons of the storms I once shielded them from. But mercy had no place in their hearts anymore. They whispered among themselves, their faces lit not by love but by cruelty. Then one of them stood, grabbed me by the arm and said, "Come outside, old man." I thought he needed help, or perhaps he wanted me to see something. But I was wrong. They dragged me to the door, 7 strong hands against 1 weak body. My protests meant nothing, my cries drowned in their laughter. They shoved me onto the porch, snow crunching beneath my thin slippers. I tried to step back in, but the door slammed hard, the lock clicked, and their shadows danced inside while I stood outside like a beggar. My breath came out in clouds, my body shaking from the sudden bite of the wind. Through the walls, their voices carried clear, "Freeze out there, old man." Another shouted, "Let him learn where he belongs." And then laughter. Sharp, merciless laughter, the sound of betrayal echoing into the night. Snowflakes struck my face like slaps, melted into my hair, seeped into my clothes. I pressed my palms to the wooden door, begging, but no one opened. Inside, they feasted. Inside, they mocked. And outside, I stood. The man who once carried them on his shoulders through storms, now thrown into one to die. Every minute dragged like an hour, every breath a knife in my lungs. My body trembled, my knees buckled, but my mind burned. Not with weakness, with something else. With fire that even snow could not put out. The snow pressed against me like a second skin, each flake melting into my clothes until they clung heavy and wet against my frail frame. My slippers, already thin from years of wear, sank into the icy crust beneath me, offering no protection from the sharp bite of winter. I stood there, trembling, my body hunched and shaking, but it was not only the cold that pierced me. It was the humiliation. I had endured poverty. I had endured hunger. I had endured the long nights of labor when I worked my hands raw just to put food on the table for 7 boys who now laughed at me. But never had I endured something like this. Never had I felt so small, so discarded, so stripped of the dignity that a man, a father, should carry until his last breath. Every breath I took felt like fire turning to ice inside my chest. My lips trembled, my teeth chattered until my jaw ached. I raised my hand and knocked on the door, not in anger, but in desperation. One soft plea, then another. The wood thudded beneath my knuckles, a sound that carried nowhere. From inside, I could still hear them. Their voices, their laughter, the clinking of glasses, the scraping of forks on plates. They were warm, full, safe, while I stood outside in the darkness, my body soaking in snow, my skin burning from the cold. I thought, surely one of them will open the door. Surely one of them will remember who I am. Surely one of them will remember what I gave, but none did. Time stretched. Minutes bled into hours. My mind began to wander, drifting through memories as though trying to shield me from the present. I remembered when they were boys, each one sick at different times, and I carried them to the clinic, even when I had no shoes. I remembered when I gave up my only winter coat, wrapping it around one son who was shivering, telling him, "I'll be fine," while I worked outside in the biting wind, my own body freezing but my heart warm because my child was safe. I remembered the countless meals I skipped, the long nights I worked double shifts so they could eat meat while I chewed dry bread. All of those memories, sacrifices carved deep into my bones, came back to me now, not as comfort, but as torment. For those boys, now men, were the same ones who shoved me outside and told me to freeze. The humiliation deepened with every passing second. The snow that clung to my beard and eyebrows felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. I could hear their laughter as clearly as though they were standing beside me. I could picture them raising their glasses, mocking me, saying, "The old man is useless." I wanted to scream, but my voice was weak, swallowed by the storm. Instead, I stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes burning with tears that froze before they could fall. My humiliation was no longer just in front of them. It was in front of myself. A man who once commanded respect in his household now stood shivering like a stray dog, waiting for mercy that never came. I thought of my wife, God rest her soul. She had once told me, "Our children will be our pride in old age." Those words haunted me as the snow piled around my feet. Pride, number. They were my shame. They had turned me into a spectacle, a joke, something to be spat upon and discarded. And I, foolish old man that I was, had believed for years that love still lived in their hearts. My humiliation was realizing that love had long since died and I had been blind to it. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the sound of my son's laughter back to me again and again, like a curse. I pulled my arms close to my chest, hugging myself for warmth, but also because there was no one else left to hold me. My humiliation was not just in the act of being left outside. It was in the realization that I was utterly alone. 7 sons in the world, and not one thought I was worth more than a pile of snow. As I stood there, I remembered nights when storms like this raged outside, and I would sit at the edge of their beds, making sure each of my boys was covered, tucking blankets under their chins so they would not catch cold. I remembered the small sighs they gave when they drifted into sleep, safe and warm, never knowing the cost their father paid to keep them there. And now, years later, it was those same boys who left me uncovered, unprotected, unvalued. The humiliation was not just in the betrayal. It was in the memory of the love I gave, weighed against the cruelty I received. The snowstorm became my confessional, the wind my witness. I whispered into the night, "Why?" My voice cracked, a weak sound swallowed by the storm. Why had my sons turned against me? Why had love become mockery? Why had sacrifice become debt they believed I owed them? I searched my memories, searching for some moment I had failed them, some mistake so grave it would justify this cruelty. But I found none. The only thing I had given them was everything: my youth, my strength, my health, my wealth, my time. And now, in my old age, they had repaid me with humiliation so deep it froze not only my body, but my very soul. As the hours dragged on, my humiliation turned into something heavier, sharper. It was no longer just sorrow. It was fury beneath the surface, silent but burning. Their laughter no longer cut me. It fueled me. The humiliation I felt standing in that snow, stripped of dignity, stripped of warmth, stripped of the respect a father deserves, became the spark of something they had forgotten. For while they mocked me, while they left me outside to freeze, they forgot that the house they laughed inside of was still mine. They forgot the deeds, the contracts, the accounts. All of it was still under my name. They thought they had thrown me away into the snow, but what they had done was awaken the fire I buried deep inside. But that moment, standing in the snow, body trembling, lips blue, tears frozen, that moment was my lowest point. My humiliation was complete. I was no longer a father to them. I was their joke, their burden, their target. And as I stood there in the storm, I made a promise to myself. I would never let them see me beg again. They had humiliated me, but the silence of that night would become the silence of my revenge. My 7 sons thought that pushing me into the snow was the end of me. They thought locking the door meant I was locked out of life. They thought their laughter erased my worth. But they forgot one simple truth. Everything they had was still mine. Every house they lived in, every car they drove, every bank account they touched, all of it was tied to my name. They thought I was weak because I was old. But old does not mean powerless. Old means I have lived long enough to build everything they enjoy, and I still hold the papers that prove it. As I stood in the cold, shaking and humiliated, I reminded myself of this. I remembered the day I signed the deeds. I remembered the long nights I worked 2 jobs just to pay for those homes. I remembered the banks that trusted my name, not theirs. They thought youth gave them control. But paper and law do not bend to youth. They bend to the man whose name is written at the bottom. That name was mine. Inside the warm house, my sons laughed at me. But the roof over their heads was mine. The chairs they sat on were bought with my money. The food they ate came from my sweat. Even the plates they licked clean were once carried home in my hands. Everything inside that house, from the walls to the windows, carried my shadow. They forgot this. They believed their laughter was stronger than law, stronger than truth, stronger than the years of work I had poured into building a future. But they were wrong. They thought spitting on my name in the cold erased the power that name still carried. They forgot that while they grew comfortable, I had never signed away my control. I had trusted them, yes. I had allowed them to live freely, yes. But the strings of power still ran through my hands. They were blind to it. They thought cruelty made them kings. They thought 7 against 1 made them rulers. But I was not their servant. I was the foundation. And a foundation, once removed, brings the whole house down. As I pressed my hand against the locked door, my body weak but my mind burning, I realized something. They thought snow was my grave. But snow was only my reminder. My humiliation was real, my pain was deep, but behind all of it stood a truth they could not laugh away. The truth was this: the man left outside in the storm still owned the storm. The man mocked as weak still held the power of destruction. The man cast aside as nothing was still the man who built everything. They forgot the power of silence. They forgot the strength of patience. They forgot that revenge does not need fists or shouts. Revenge needs only time and the right hand to move papers. And that hand was mine. They laughed inside the house, but I smiled bitterly in the snow, because I knew something they did not. I knew that their laughter was only the start. Soon, that laughter would turn into screams, and the house they locked me out of would no longer be theirs to enjoy. That night, standing in the snow, I made my decision. My body was weak, my hands were shaking, but my heart was harder than stone. I realized begging would change nothing. Love was gone. Respect was gone. My 7 sons had turned into strangers with my blood in their veins, but no soul in their hearts. They wanted me dead in the cold, and that was enough for me to bury every last hope of mercy. My tears froze on my cheeks, and as they froze, they turned into fire inside me. I decided I would not fight them with words. I would not shout at them. I would not curse them. Words had no power anymore. They would laugh at my words the same way they laughed at my pain. So I chose silence. Silence would be my weapon. Silence would be my shield. Silence would be my revenge. I would let them laugh for one last night, and then I would take back everything they had built their pride on. I thought of every sacrifice I had made, the decades of labor, the long nights, the skipped meals, the broken bones. I thought of every moment I bent my back to build a future for them. And I thought of the snow biting into my skin while they laughed at me. That memory, that humiliation, burned so deeply that I knew I could never forgive. Forgiveness was weakness, and weakness had almost killed me. Strength was all I had left. So I made my decision clear in my heart. Tomorrow I would go to my lawyer. Tomorrow I would take the deeds. Tomorrow I would sign away every house, every car, every account, every luxury that my sons thought belonged to them. I would rip the ground out from under their feet and leave them standing in the same cold they forced me into. They thought snow was my punishment, but I would turn snow into their curse. I told myself, they will learn what it feels like to have nothing. They will learn what it feels like to be left outside. They will learn that the man they mocked still holds the final word. My decision was not made in anger. It was made in calm, heavy silence. It was made in the same silence I carried as I worked my life away. And I knew that once I acted, there would be no turning back. I would burn every bridge. I would erase every tie. My sons would lose not only their homes, but the pride they carried in their names. That was my decision. Cold, final, and absolute. The morning after that cold night, I woke with pain in my joints but fire in my heart. I no longer felt like a weak old man who had been left in the snow. I felt like the true owner of every paper, every key, and every dollar that had built my sons' lives. They thought I was finished, but the truth was that I still held power in my hands. I did not shout. I did not curse. I simply rose, dressed, and began to act. I put on my heavy coat, slid my old shoes across the floor, and pulled out the folder I had kept hidden for years. Inside were deeds to houses, bank papers, car titles, all signed in my name. My sons had laughed at me for keeping them safe. They called me paranoid, useless, old. But now those papers were weapons. I tucked the folder under my arm, stepped into the street, and walked toward the lawyer's office. The wind stung my face, but it no longer felt cruel. It felt like a push from life itself, reminding me that the weak can rise if they decide to stand. The bus arrived. I climbed aboard slowly, every step heavy but firm. The driver nodded, not knowing the war I carried in my heart. My sons sat warm in their chairs at home, proud and blind. They had no idea their empire would end before sunset. When I entered the lawyer's office, he greeted me with surprise. He saw the marks of a hard night on my face. He asked if I was ready. I said yes. I told him every detail, how they mocked me, how they dragged me into the snow, how they slammed the door and laughed as I froze outside. He listened in silence. Then he looked at the folder and said, "You still own everything. We can act fast." One by one, I laid the papers on his desk. Each deed was a memory. One house had a roof I had fixed myself when the rain broke through. Another had walls I painted when my sons married and wanted fresh rooms. Another had trees I planted in the yard when I still believed family would last forever. Each page was a piece of me, but each page was also proof that their laughter would not last. The lawyer moved quickly. He called estate agents. He filed documents. He stamped approvals. He asked me to sign my name again and again. My hand trembled, but not with fear. It trembled with power. With every stroke of the pen, I felt chains breaking off my shoulders. The homes they slept in, the cars they drove, the accounts they boasted of, all were shifting back into my control. I ordered him to sell the houses fast. I told him I did not want months of waiting. I wanted buyers ready within days. I asked that new locks be placed the moment each sale closed. I wanted my sons to walk to their doors and find strangers carrying boxes inside. I wanted them to feel the shock of loss the way I felt the shock of cold. The cars were next. Each one carried their pride. They drove past me with loud music, mocking the slow walk of an old man. But the papers showed they were never truly theirs. They were mine. I signed the transfers. Buyers came. Titles changed. I felt no regret as I pressed my pen down. They had chosen to throw me into the dark. Now I chose to throw them into emptiness. The bank accounts were the hardest. For years I had filled them. I had saved and moved money to help them. They never asked how I managed it. They simply took. But now I ordered every account closed, every balance shifted. I created a trust under my own name. The lawyer secured it where no hand of theirs could reach. The millions they thought safe were now mine alone. I did not hide my actions. I made sure there were witnesses. An old friend came to the office to watch. A neighbor who knew my years of sacrifice stood by. I wanted truth to be clear. No lie could erase it. No excuse could cover it. The records were signed, stamped, and copied. My sons could shout all they wanted, but the law would point back to me. The first house sold that very afternoon. The buyer signed quickly. Money shifted. The lawyer smiled for the first time. I did not smile back. This was not joy. This was justice. I had not struck them with fists. I had not shouted at their faces. I had done something colder. I had erased the roof above their heads with nothing more than ink. By nightfall, 2 more houses were gone. Cars were moved to other hands. Accounts were frozen. The work of a single day had undone the work of their entire lives of greed. They still slept that night thinking they were safe. But when the morning sun rose, they would see strangers in their driveways, locks that no longer turned, and banks that no longer answered. I stepped outside into the street when it was done. The snow still lay on the ground, but it no longer felt heavy. My breath steamed into the air, and I felt the weight of years lift from my chest. I had not begged. I had not waited. I had acted. My revenge was not wild rage. It was quiet, legal, and final. I looked back once at the office windows, glowing with warm light. I thought of my sons at their dinner table, laughing at me as I shook in the snow. I thought of how they pointed and mocked. But soon, they would sit at another table, empty, broken, and lost. They would see the cost of cruelty. They would taste the same cold I had tasted. That day, I had executed my revenge, not with a shout, not with a blow, but with signatures, papers, and law. The power they thought gone was never gone. It was waiting in my folder. And now, they would pay for every laugh, every insult, and every cruel night. The next day came heavy, not with snow this time, but with the weight of truth that my 7 sons could not escape. They woke up as if nothing had changed, as if the world was still theirs to rule, as if the roofs above their heads and the warm food on their tables would never vanish. But before the day was over, they would learn what it felt like to be stripped of everything. One son returned to his house after work, humming a tune, only to see a moving truck parked in the driveway, strangers carrying boxes inside the door he thought was his. He rushed forward, shouting and waving his arms, but the man at the door held up papers signed and stamped with my name, telling him the truth in plain words. "This house is no longer yours." Another son tried his key at his front door and found it no longer worked. The lock had been changed, and through the window he saw a new family sitting at the table, children laughing in the same space where he had once mocked me. He banged and shouted, but neighbors came out and shook their heads, whispering, "That's the man who left his father to freeze." A third son stormed into the bank, furious, demanding his money, but the teller pulled up the file and calmly told him the accounts were closed, the balances moved, and that he had never been the true owner. He walked out pale, sweating, his pride collapsed under the truth. The other 4 sons tried to fight with words, visiting the estate agent, demanding answers, but the contracts were clean, signed, and final, and the agent told them there was nothing left to argue. By sundown, all 7 stood broken, realizing that the empire they thought they had built on my back had collapsed overnight. The town learned quickly, as towns always do, and whispers turned into open talk. Neighbors pointed, friends turned away, and relatives muttered that what they had done to me had come back to them. Wives began to pack bags, unwilling to stay with men who had betrayed their own father. Friends stopped answering calls, bars closed their doors, and no one wanted to be seen beside them. The same mouths that had once laughed at me now spoke their names with disgust. My sons, who once strutted with arrogance, now walked with their heads bent low, knocking on doors that would not open, begging for help that would not come. They felt the same cold I had felt, but not from snow this time, from the world itself turning its back. One fell to his knees in the street, shouting my name. Another sat on the curb with his head in his hands, whispering, "We've lost everything." And indeed they had. This was the fallout, not with fists or flames, but with silence, signatures, and the steady truth that no cruelty escapes justice forever. The aftermath of my decision spread like a fire that no one could put out, and my 7 sons stood in the middle of it with no shelter to run to. The houses they had once claimed as their pride were gone, taken by strangers who looked at them with cold eyes when they tried to step on the porches. The cars they once drove with music blasting were parked in the driveways of other families, their names erased from the papers forever. The bank accounts they thought were endless wells of money showed nothing but zeros when they begged for answers, and the tellers told them calmly that the funds had been transferred to trusts under my name, safe and out of their reach. Their wives and partners, who had once smiled beside them, packed their things and left in shame, saying they could not stand beside men who threw their own father into the snow and laughed while he trembled. Friends who had once cheered their arrogance no longer answered calls, no longer met them in bars, and no longer opened their doors when they came knocking in desperation. Neighbors who had once waved at them now pointed from across the street, whispering the truth. Those are the men who betrayed their own father. Their arrogance crumbled in front of the whole town, and every person they passed looked at them with a mix of anger and pity. They tried to fix it with words, shouting that it was not fair, that I had tricked them, but the law held strong, the contracts were final, and no one believed their cries. They went from proud sons who laughed at an old man to broken men who begged in the street for a place to sleep. The snow that once bit at my skin now seemed to follow them, for everywhere they went, doors stayed closed, hearts stayed cold, and faces turned away. They learned in those days that humiliation does not fade quickly, and that the same cruelty they had poured into me now lived in every hour of their own lives. Their downfall became the story of the town, told in markets, whispered in churches, and passed along at dinner tables. The 7 sons who had mocked their father were now the 7 men who had nothing left, and no matter how much they begged, no one gave them back the comfort they had stolen from me. This was the aftermath. Not a moment of rage, but a lifetime of emptiness. And as they wandered through it, they finally understood that betrayal carries a price heavier than any snowstorm. Justice came to me not in loud cheers, not in applause, but in the quiet peace of finally breathing without chains around my neck. I lived far from the house where cruelty had once filled the walls, in a new place where no one called me a burden, where no one spat in my face, and where no one laughed at my pain. The money I had taken back was mine again, the property sold and gone from the names of my sons who had thought I was powerless, and every day I woke knowing they could never touch it. I ate meals at my own table, warm food on clean plates, and each bite reminded me that I no longer bent my head in shame. I walked through markets where strangers greeted me with respect, not whispers, because they knew my story and they knew I had endured more than most men should. Meanwhile, my 7 sons sat in ruins, stripped of their houses, their wives, their money, and their respect. They had laughed as I froze in the snow, but now they walked the streets with nothing but the cold of their choices pressing down on their backs. No one opened doors for them, no one offered shelter, and no one wanted to be seen standing beside men who had mocked their father and driven him out into the night. Their laughter had turned to begging, their pride had turned to silence, and their arrogance had turned to humiliation. And I did not need to strike them or shout at them to make it happen. I let the law, the truth, and their own betrayal destroy them. My justice was simple. I lived free. They lived empty. I carried dignity. They carried shame. And in the quiet of my new home, I often thought of that night in the snow. The voices behind the locked door telling me to freeze, and I smiled, not with joy in their downfall, but with relief that I had risen above it. Final thought. They left me outside in the snow to freeze. I sold everything they owned and left them with nothing.